In this topic, we will see what is the second normal form. There are only two rules for the second normal form. That your table should be in the first normal form and you need to eliminate the partial dependency. Second normal form is associated with the elimination of the partial dependencies. What do you mean by partial dependencies? Let's try to understand by means of one example. Okay, so if you see here, I have created some table structure, and into this table structure you will try to see kind of a marking system we need to develop. Student is there, subject is there, and marks are there. Student, subject, and the marks. So inside this, if you can see, student ID is a primary key in the student table. In the subject table, subject ID is the primary key. And at the first glance, you might see score ID is the primary key over here. We will see it is the primary key or not. So students are getting entered or students are getting registered in the student table. So you can create any number of subject in the subject table, and what you can say, score, for the exam purpose we have created this score table. Now my concern over here is that if I ask you a question, give me the marks for, here I can say give me the marks for student 10. Is it enough? Give me the marks of student 10, student whose ID is 10 or ID is 1. Can you give me the marks for the student? Give me the marks for student whose ID is 1. So you'll ask me a question, for which subject? You'll ask me next question, for which subject? Because if you see over here, you'll ask me this question, for which subject? If you see over here, the student 1 have taken 2 exams for this subject and this subject. So only providing student ID for asking his or her marks is not sufficient. You need to provide the subject ID also. So question should be like this: give me the marks of student 1 and subject 2. Student 1, student means student ID 1, and subject 2 means subject ID 2. Right? But if you observe carefully, if you combine these two things, they create the primary key. It's a composite key. And see, these are the unique values: 1 1, 1 2, 2 1, 2 1, 3 2. These are the unique values. So instead of considering score ID as a primary key for the score table, the combination of these two columns is creating more sense. These two columns can be combined, that is the composite key, and that can be used as a primary key, which is creating more sense. Right? So primary keys should not be chosen randomly. It should be chosen on the basis of your business requirements. We have seen this thing at the time of the keys. So if someone asks you, give me the marks of student 1, it is insufficient. You need to provide the subject also. Give me the marks for student 1 and the subject 1. Then you can say 20 marks. Okay. Which means that the marks column is fully dependent on the set of primary key. Set means what? 2 columns, student and the subject ID. So this is the primary key of the table, and the marks is completely dependent on full primary key, that is the dependency. This thing is called as functional dependency. Marks are dependent on student and the subject ID. You cannot give marks only by means of subject ID. Then you'll ask me question, for which student? Give me the marks of subject 1. You'll ask me a question, for which student? So you need to provide, if you want to get the marks, you need to provide both student and subject to get the correct marks. This thing is called as dependency. So marks are dependent on student and the subject. Let's consider the another scenario over here now. I want to get teacher for particular subject. So what you will say? Give me the teacher name. Give me the teacher for subject 1. Give me the teacher for subject 1. So teacher and the subject can be associated. Give me the teacher for subject 1. Remember that the primary key for the column, for the score table, is a composite key. Primary key for the score table is a composite key, which is composed of 2 columns, student ID and the subject ID, right? And marks is fully dependent on student ID and the subject ID. But if you talk about the teacher from this primary key, teacher has nothing to do with the student column, right? Teacher is partially dependent on the primary key. Inside the primary key, teacher is only dependent on the subject ID. So this is the subject, this is the teacher. Well, we generally we don't say that for the particular student who is teacher, for the particular student, for that subject who is teacher. So student is not required in that case. So for the particular subject who is teacher, which means that teacher is not dependent on the student ID, but teacher is only dependent on the subject ID of this combination. From this combination, teacher is only dependent on this section or this part and not this part. This thing is the partial dependency. And second normal form says that each and every column of your table should be dependent on the primary key. So marks is fully dependent on the primary key, but teacher is not fully dependent on the primary key. It is only dependent on the subject. So this column shouldn't be here. We need to remove this column from here, right? So where to place that column? How to remove the partial dependency? You need to add one column subject ID over here. Or teacher, you need to add one column teacher over here, right? So I already have done that. Let me copy a normalized subject. Let's copy this. This is the normalized subject. Here we can say this is the normalized subject. This is what the normalized subject is. Okay. Now, score table, teacher needs to be removed from the score table. And your score table would be only like this. These are nothing but what? The normalized table. So just forget about this table now and forget about this table now. So student, subject and the score. This is normalized by means of the second normal form. What second normal form says? Second normal form talks about partial dependency. We have discussed what do you mean by partial dependency. Hope you have understood this session. If you have understood, please write it in the comment box. If you have any question, also write it in the comment box. Thank you.